it is not impossible ever to do battle with that which we know we need to overcome so that we can shine in that light. Hi, everyone. I'm the lucky one today. I get to talk about rising. Poor Morley, last week, the subject was how devotees fall. And he told a superb story from the ancient teachings of India. And I can't go through the whole story here because it would repeat his talk, but I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version just to give some perspective. And the story was about this hunter who represents the negative qualities in us, the bad habits in us, that kind of thing, and this giant elephant who represents our higher nature, us. And so the hunter kept chasing the elephant got tired of it. The elephant turned it around and went after the hunter, and at one point had his big giant foot right over the hunter, was about to squish him, and then realized he felt compassion, so he didn't squish him. And the story goes that the elephant went away, the hunter went away, but the hunter, these negative traits, got power. He thought, he just grew and grew and turned around and went back after the elephant and eventually entrapped the elephant. And the moral of the story was that when we get rid of bad habits or negative traits, to really get rid of them totally. Otherwise, they'll rebuild in strength and come after us again, and we'll have to deal with them again, and hence reincarnation. We keep coming back over and over, dealing with these same issues. Well, it reminded me of a story in the West, in the life of St. Francis, where St. Francis he had all the monks with him, the friars, at the Portiuncula, this little chapel, and they lived around it. That was their monastery. And he urged them to keep their hearts and minds uplifted through prayer, meditation, service, and to always hold each other in the highest. Well, one day, because he knew that around the outer edge of the monastery, Satan, the devil, whatever word you prefer to use, kept trying to get in and get them. And so one day, one of the friars was internally, he wasn't expressing it, but he was getting really upset with another one of the friars. There was something about him that was irritating him. And his mind started becoming critical. He had a hard time concentrating on his prayers. And the minute that happened, there was a crack in the door. And the satanic force was able to come in and pounce on him, and he had magnetized it. And so it was very powerful and started attacking the other friars as well. And thankfully, St. Francis came in and he had the spiritual magnetism to be able to repel that satanic force. It went away, and the moral of the story, the end of the story is, of course, that the friar sincerely prayed and apologized to the man he had been so critical of, and everyone lived happily ever after, right? That's how life goes? No, I don't think so. But the similarity to me is the magnetism that we draw to ourselves when we allow our consciousness to get into negative traits, which we all have. We wouldn't be living on this earth plane if we did not have them. We're in egos, and that's what happens. That's how it plays out. But they grow in strength if we feed them and give them energy. And today's topic is how devotees rise. So I decided to look at Swami Kriyananda's book, The Promise of Immortality, again, because it covers the first 26 weeks of the year, and we're in week 24. And again, he had a different title. His title in this expanded book is How Devotees Can Rise Again. Not just how devotees rise. And I meditated on that. And what it meant to me is that we start in a risen state, in an exalted state, in a pure state of the soul. And then, given the free will, we play out karma, and ego just encrusts that soul with layer after layer, incarnation after incarnation, until we need to learn how to shed that to be able to rise again, how we can rise again. And I find that helpful. Many of you know that I was born in a non-religious Jewish family, so not in the Christian tradition at all, but in the West. And as a little girl, when we immigrated when I was 10, I was a prime target for my little friends who were trying to convert me. And they would take me, I was always interested in spirituality, so they would invite me to their churches and I would go. And one of the things that made me not get saved is that concept that I heard, not in all those churches, but in many of those churches, which was, we're essentially evil. And when goodness happens, it's the exception. But we start off evil in this world. And I just couldn't accept that. It didn't resonate with me on any level, so I kept searching. And finally, when I was 19, I came upon Yogananda's teachings, which are an extension of the great wisdom teachings from Krishna in the East, and learned that we are essential, not learned, I revisited, reawakened to a reality I could reconcile myself to, which is that we're essentially pure, we're essentially good. That's our starting point. And all we need to do is peel away the onion until we get to that transparent center again. And that's the purpose of this life. But here we are, and we are in these egos, and we do make a lot of mistakes. And so what happens, what Yogananda urges us to do, is to nip them in the bud. And English being my second language, I had to just memorize idioms and accept them for their meaning, not even think about them. But when I sat and thought about this concept of nipping in the bud, I realized that's really what we're doing. We're picking it up at its center, at its essence, and we're getting rid of it. And if we don't nip it in the bud, then the weeds keep growing, and the plants that are ensnaring us keep growing. So we've got to pull the whole doggone thing out. And that was the meaning of Morley's story last week. We want to get rid of it all. And what happens is often we don't recognize even that fault or that flaw or that bad habit until it's way entrenched in our consciousness. We can't nip it in the bud as a young little baby sprout. We're dealing with entanglements. And it's harder, but it's not impossible. And that's what Swami Kriyananda spends most of this chapter in the expanded book talking about. That it is not impossible ever to do battle with that which we know we need to overcome so that we can shine in that light again, become transparent in that light again. By way of example, I was thinking about a time years ago. There was this man I had to work with, and he was very perceptive, and he had a very strong personality. And so he would perceive something that, was troubling to me, something that was testy to me. And then he would proceed to just poke at it, to try to get a rise out of me. And more often than not, he'd get a big rise out of me. And I kept praying about this for a long time. I'm talking years here. And finally, I just decided, whatever happens, meditation slows down the reactive process. Whatever happens, I am going to not react. I may not be able to have the right spirit in that moment, but I'm not going to react. And I was determined to do that, and meditation really helps with that. And so it started to happen. And the less I reacted, the more frustrated he got, because he really liked getting a rise out of me. But I didn't let it happen again. And then what happened in time, I was in neutral gear, right? And what happened in time is that I was able, through prayer, meditation, devotion, come to a place where I could have compassion, be around this person again, and not sort of try to avoid them, but think good thoughts about them. But I had to go to neutral gear first. So we can do this in stages, is my point. We can deal with the tests, the challenges, the overcoming of our negative habits, our bad habits. Yogananda explains that we don't get rid of a bad habit just like that, but we can replace it with a good habit. And then in time, the bad habit lessens its grip on us and eventually disappears. And that's the divine promise. That's why this is called the promise of immortality. That's the divine promise from Krishna and Christ, East and West, all traditions, really. That's the essence of Christ's teachings. They weren't teaching that in the churches that I went to because they had lost touch with that through the centuries. But that is the essence of it. We can do this step by step because it is our essential nature. The end of the reading today talks about the fact that the point is that Christ said, "Me have not always with you." And it reminded me of a story that Swami Kriyananda used to like to tell about an abbot in the 10th century, and the monk in his monastery asked him, "What do I do if I'm in my cell, praying, meditating, and I experience ecstasy, and the bell rings to come to the group meditation in the chapel?" Pardon my Ananda language. I don't know what they call that in the chapel, but you know what I mean. And the abbot said, "Stay in ecstasy," remembering this particular part of his own teaching, of his Guru Christ's teaching in the scriptures, as the story was talking about today. But then about 100 years ago, in the same monastery, a monk asked the abbot of that time the same question. And the answer he received was, "You should stop the meditation you're having. The ecstasy you're experiencing, Christ will hold on to it for you after you're dead. You get to do that for eternity. But as long as you're on this earth and the bell rings, you should go to that group meditation because you should follow the rules on this earth." And you know, it's sort of a heartbreak to think about how far we go, how far we've come. Not in a good way. You know, East and West, we've gone through the darker ages, we've gone through Kali Yuga, we've gone through institutionalism. In the East, it turned into superstition. In the West, it turned into, rigid dogmatism. But we're coming into a new time now where we understand the more subtle aspects of these teachings because we're living now in an age of energy. We understand, we attune ourselves to the energetics of the situation. So what does that story mean to us now? It means choose meditation as opposed to restless activity when we can. Choose the books we read, the movies we watch, the friends we have, even the workplace. I have many friends who think that they're sort of stuck with the jobs they have because, they need the income. And it's the only job that's available to them right now. God is everywhere, in everything, in us. So why not make a conscious choice of where we want to be, who we want to be around, what environment we want to be in that's going to support us into a more uplifted state of consciousness. We don't have to settle for these things. Choose simplicity. Because the simple life, when I first moved to Ananda Village in California, it was barely a village, and we lived in very rustic. We didn't have running water, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have infrastructure. And it was beautiful. It took longer to do everything, but it allowed us to see what simple living was about, so that as life progressed and we find ourselves now in beautiful temples and simple but lovely homes. We can take it or leave it. It doesn't define our happiness. So Swami Kriyananda said at a certain point, once Ananda was starting to grow, let's invite people when they first come there to live in that simple environment. And we've kept part of Ananda that way, Ananda in California, to live in that simple environment for a year, just to experience how sweet it is to live the simple life, so that we don't have to become attached to even those material things that we are blessed with, including this lovely temple. I pinch myself every time I come into this temple for the blessing of getting to serve here. But it's a blessing. And if I'm asked to serve somewhere else, that's a blessing. It doesn't matter on the outside. So choosing a simple life is a blessed thing. We're no longer attached to any of those material things, which then by definition begin to define what kind of work we have to take and who we have to be around to get there. So, how we can rise again. Joy to you.